Hey everyone, Connie here with a discussion video, I guess you could call it. Um, and today I want to kind of go over, and I'm going to try to keep this as brief as I can, but who knows? But I want to try to go over the question of why do I, as a reactor, seem so obsessed with queer representation in media? Like, if you watch my content, you may notice that anytime any kind of queer representation shows up, I get very, very excited, or anytime there's even hints of queer representation, I like latch onto it very heavily. Um, and the easy answer I could just go with would be, oh, I'm queer. I'm a pansexual trans woman. So I could easily just go with that and leave it at that. I'm queer, so of course I like to see queer shit. But it's more, I don't want to say complicated, but there's more depth to it than that. It's not just that I, as a queer person, love to see queer media and queer characters in media. I mean, that's definitely part of it, without question. But there's more to it. See, in queer media or in media for so long, um, queer characters hadn't really been much of a thing. They existed, but a lot of times they were used for either a joke or in a negative connotation. And over the years, they started being implemented more and more, but it was very slow. It was a slow drip feed that honestly just didn't really do much because it was so minor. It was like, okay, you'll have a couple shows here and there out of the hundreds of shows or whatnot, hundreds of movies and everything released that year. You'll have like maybe a couple of shows with a queer character in it, and they're not going to be a main character. They're not going to be a focus. They're not going to, even if they're not just meant as a joke, they're just not going to do much of anything. It took a long time to really get like really good queer representation in media. And nowadays we have a lot more of that. We have a lot more shows that have that as the norm, a lot more movies with that as a norm, but not completely yet because they're still in the minority. A lot of times people have to rely on ships because nothing is ever canonized, because whether in anime, cartoons, live action stuff, or whatever, creators are oftentimes either not allowed to canonize anything or afraid to, and either way, because of possible backlash against them by more conservative audiences. This is why you see so many shows where there's hints of queerness in there, but it never goes far enough because the creators aren't being allowed to, basically. A big example of this was The Legend of Korra. Like, they intended to have Korrasami be canon, but they weren't allowed to do much of anything with it. So really, they had to try and lay like very subtle hints, and mind you, there are a lot of us who did notice them, and it's like, oh yeah, there's something here, but the only thing they could actually like have was the very last seconds of the very last episode, and all they could do was show Korra and Asami holding hands. They weren't even allowed to have them kiss, not even the very last scene of the very last episode. And nowadays things have gotten a lot better with the advent of streaming services, kind of changing the entire way we handle a lot of animation. A lot of animation has been allowed to, and a lot of shows and movies in general have been allowed to get away with a lot more. There's shows like She-Ra and Dead End Paranormal Park and whatnot that highlight queer characters. that are like, the main characters of the series and are extremely well written and portrayed. But even with those kinds of shows, they're not the norm. They're still in the minority. They're still just not present enough. So when we do get canon characters in media, whether it be a live action show or movie, an animated show or movie, a video game, a comic, whatever, when we get characters who are gay, lesbian, pansexual, transgender, and so on and so forth, yeah, we celebrate them. We get excited. Because it's important, especially when we see ourselves in them. Because I know for a fact that a lot of the time when I go out and go to places, I most of the time feel the most comfortable dressed like this in a simple t-shirt and simple pants and stuff. A more, I guess you could say, excuse me. I knew that was coming. I was trying to avoid it if I could. But I guess you could say a more like androgynous appearance, something that like, anyone and everyone wears. Because I'm afraid of going out wearing more girly clothes most of the time. Because I'm afraid, honestly, I'm afraid I'll get attacked. I hear constant stories of queer people being attacked in the streets just because they're queer. Trans girls being beaten or even killed just because they're trans. And in a lot of cases, without even having done anything. Like, that doesn't, it's obviously never okay no matter what, but I've heard stories of just like trans people being killed and everything for literally just walking down the street. They're just walking down the street, someone sees them, and it's like, oh, ew, a trans person, let's kill them. It's like that shit happens. So oftentimes, a lot of us have to be more androgynous in our presentation to avoid that. And we don't want to be necessarily. Some of us are okay with it, but a lot of us don't want to be like that, but we have to for our own protection. Or at the very least, we have to travel in groups of people and never alone. That's why this representation is so important to me. Because it allows me to fully embrace all of this. It allows me to fully embrace myself. Seeing these characters that represent me in, again, any of this media, whether it be a pansexual character like Blitz from Hell of a Boss, whether it be a trans character like Yamato from One Piece, whether it just be queer characters in general, like Harley Quinn and Ivy from, well, Harley Quinn. Seeing these characters represent the community, and in a lot of cases being very out and proud in these shows, is, in a way, it's thrilling. It's exciting. It makes me feel seen, and it makes me feel valid in a world that otherwise doesn't. In a world where I've lost friends because of this, where family continues to misgender and dead name me. A world where I'm just seen as male by so many people because of bigotry, hatred, and a lack of understanding. So when I see this kind of stuff in media, even if it's a little more subtle, even if it's more hinted at and not like full out confirmed, I latch onto it very strongly because it means something to me. Because in a world that took so long to even get to this point, a world where our media still has a lot of room to grow in this regard, a world where queer people are hated on, beaten, even killed just for being themselves. In a world like this, the level of positivity we get from seeing these characters and connecting with them is it's like a drug of absolute pure happiness and relief. It's it's important because throughout all of the history of media, straight, white, cisgender people have always had representation. They've always been the norm. And they still are. That hasn't actually changed. There's been a lot more representation for queer people, people of color, just anyone who's not the white, heteronormative, cisnormative standard. There's been a lot more of it. But it's still in the minority for the most part. And luckily, it does seem like that's starting to shift a little more again. Even big companies like Disney with the MCU are making massive changes and bringing in a lot of characters who are, people of color, who aren't the norm. But they're still not bringing in enough queer representation. And it's still being drip fed to us way too slowly overall. So yeah, when I react to a show like Kakegurui Twin and I see characters who have insane levels of chemistry, who are never confirmed to be together, but it kind of blatantly says that one of them has a crush on the other. And again, there is something to work off of, even if it's trying to keep it a little more held back. It's like, yeah, I'm going to latch onto that and I'm going to ship the hell out of them because it's basically all there. They're just not either being allowed to say it directly or they're too afraid to. When I see people say that the Wano arc of One Piece would be better if you took out Yamato and replaced him with another character because they feel he didn't add anything, and part of that being because a lot of them felt that his story arc should have led to him denouncing his male identity and his quote unquote obsession over Odin by the end of the arc. Seeing people say that and everything, it's like, yeah, of course I'm going to latch on to a lot of this queer representation when we have that kind of discourse still pumping through fandom communities. That kind of vile, sick, gross discourse that invalidates trans people just because they're not adhering to the ideas that people are putting on them. the kind of discourse that decries shows like She-Ra as woke propaganda simply for showing diverse body types and, you know, having sexualities that aren't straight. This is why I put so much value in representation in media. This is why when I see one of these shows, I do make a big deal out of it. Why I do latch onto it so hard emotionally. Why the Lumity shit in Owl House is so legitimately and strongly important to me, to where it's one of the massive contributing factors to the Owl House being one of my favorite shows of all time. Because we still live in a world where queer representation is the exception rather than the norm. It's weird, it's out there, and so many people still look at it as intrusive or forced propaganda. And we're going to continue to see that. But we're also going to continue to see a rise in queer representation, with more queer creators coming out of the woodworks making their own shows. And there's going to be pushback, there's going to be problems, there's going to be a lot of issues. Owl House got basically canceled and is given a shorter final season. Infinity Train, which I know has queer rep in its final season, got canceled. And so many other shows have been fucked over simply for putting in queer stuff. And there's so many shows that would have put in more queer stuff if they were allowed to. I'm sure if allowed, Adventure Time would have been a lot more full of queer shit. A lot more consistently and constantly. I'm sure Amphibia would have had a lot more of that. There are some shows out there breaking the mold. Shows like She-Ra, like even Steven Universe, counting on shows from the past. Shows like The Owl House, and more recently, Dead End Paranormal Park. But again, these shows are still not enough, especially with shows like She-Ra and Dead End not having as large of an audience as they really needed to. And the same can even be said for Kipo and the Age of Wonder Beasts. We need to work on making this a norm. And part of doing so is to embrace what we have and what we get, to show people that this is what we want as the norm. And obviously, no one's saying that every character has to be trans or queer in general in any way. No, not every character needs to be, but we want that representation to be more normalized, to be more consistent, to be more well shown in massive productions. We don't want to be relegated to specifically queer media. Stuff that is obviously made by and for us, but is still segregated away from the mainstream. Even the most mainstream of queer media, stuff like Euphoria, is still seen as quote-unquote queer media, rather than just media. rather than just being a TV show. It's specifically seen as a queer TV show. And it's like, we need to get past that. We need to move past that to where this stuff is just integrated in. So that is why I make such a big deal out of it in my reactions. That is why I fawn over these relationships and ships and everything whenever they appear. That is why most of the ships that I do have for these shows are queer. And why I latch on to the idea of those a lot easier. Because it's something that matters to me and something that I need to see more of in the stuff that I partake of. So when you see me reacting to something and I'm gushing over the idea of Maki and Nobara in Jujutsu Kaisen, or I'm just really getting heated on social media about people misgendering Yamato in One Piece or something like that, just know where that comes from. And why on this channel, queer representation and acceptance will always be the norm. That on this channel, that is a part of the identity of the channel. And honestly, if you don't like that, you can fuck right on off. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to be nice about it. If you have a problem with this channel being queer positive, if you have a problem with this channel being supportive of the queer community, and that means all facets of the queer community, then you can fuck right on off. We don't want you here. I pride myself on this channel being welcoming to people, but if you're going to be like that, if you're going to be like anti-LGBT in any way, you are not welcome. If you're going to be anti-anyone like that, you're not going to be welcome. If you're going to hate on someone who is a minority or an oppressed people, you're not welcome. No matter whether it's because of the color of their skin, whether it's because of their gender, their sexuality. If you're going to hate on someone for shit like that, go away. Because this shit's important to me. And it's important in general. And honestly, you either get with the times or you get left behind. Our world is becoming a lot more embracing of this stuff. And it's taking a while. It's taking a lot of effort. It's not coming quick or easy, but it's happening. And you don't get a choice in that matter. And if you don't like it, you're out of luck. We don't want you here. So thank you for watching this video. I know over 20 minutes of me kind of rambling a little bit, but I needed to make this. In the light of getting consistent comments on BitChute and whatnot, people like saying stuff on there like, oh, you'll never be a girl, or calling me like slurs and stuff on there. I usually delete those comments, but still. In light of all the stuff I constantly hear, I want to make that very clear on what this channel stands for and on why it's going to continue to stand for this stuff. So thank you all so much for tuning in. And just know that this is a safe channel. And if you ever need to talk to me about any of this stuff, I'm a safe person to talk to about it. I will gladly, happily, and very, very lovingly hear you out about anything regarding gender or sexuality you need to discuss. If you want to do it more in private, my link to Discord is in the description, and you can contact me in a private message on there or on my Twitter, anywhere like that. But my comments are also always open. So feel free. And for the time being, yeah. Thank you so much for continuing to support the channel, for all of you who have, and all of you who continue to do so. And with that, I want to end this video on a sort of announcement. This channel, sometime in the near future, I don't know exactly when, will be going under a rebranding. We've been using the channel name and everything, Miss Connie, for a good long time. And it was mostly done to emphasize the fact of me being a girl after having come out. And, I mean, with it just basically being my name, I've very much, like, vibed with it, I guess you could say. But sometime in the future, I would even say near future, we will be rebranding the channel. Nothing else about the channel will change. The channel name will only slightly change. The channel banner will only slightly change. Things will be very slight, but nothing about the channel's content or anything will be different at all. Nothing about the channel's reactions or anything will change at any point. The rebranding will simply be a visual and name-based thing. I will let you all know more information as I figure it out. It might not even be until the start of 2023. But I'm letting you know that it will be happening. And I already kind of have an idea of where it's going with that. But if you have anything you want to add for that, anything you want to suggest or ideas or anything like that, feel free. I'm always willing to hear you guys out. I'm always willing to listen. Because listening helps us, hear. It sounds silly, but if you think about it, we can't hear people unless we listen. So thank you all so much for tuning in. And for now, I'm Connie and I'm signing off. See y'all next time.